Welcome back to Real Talk for an Unreal World. I just want to say thanks to everyone for sharing time and space with me and listening to conversations that are much deeper than the surface level conversations that are taking place in most communities. And I have just chosen to become an example of vulnerability and openly discuss the difficulties that I have traversed in this life, because I know that all of us are traversing our own difficulties in our own way. And I feel like the best way we can grow through that is learning from the experiences that we have gone through in our own unique experiences and sharing about them. So that's what this podcast does, is it brings on people that are okay to bear their deepest, darkest feelings, which I believe is a beautiful way to transmute them from darkness to light. My guest today is Graham Robinson. He is the author of Pain, Loss, and Desire. And he comes on today to share about abandonment. You know, from a very young age, he was abandoned as a child, and he abandoned his family, and he began to run from his problems, as many of us do. And that led him to some very difficult experiences in this life of abuse, sexual abuse, and an inability to create authentic relationships. Graham's a wonderful human being who today is the facilitator of a men's group called Real Experience, where he encourages men to come on and talk about emotions and emotional traumas to help process and break generational trauma within their life. He's a very cool man, and I'm very grateful for him coming on the show today and expressing himself from a very authentic perspective so that we can learn from him. So I hope you enjoy the episode as much as I did having it. Wonderful. I appreciate you reaching out and establishing a connection. That's fantastic.
It's a pleasure. I was impressed with the work you're doing. When I was sort of writing the book I wrote, I didn't understand about the lived experience whole thing, and as I went on, I started to understand that. And of course, yours is I guess the ultimate lived experience when you show, when you can work with other people, and it's the only thing people accept is that somebody who knows how they feel, what they've gone through, how it is, and so on. That is far more beneficial than somebody who's studied and got a degree and sat there and done the theory, but it's the lived experience that really works for people. And that's what I've been discovering. So I was just amazed by your story. So it was great.
Yeah, I've noticed in my life with the way that I'm able to do things, I can impact people, like you say, on a much greater level. And for me, the only thing I care about, as I believe any doctor or any therapist or anybody in the work of healing with humans should care about, is results. And I see that with the things that I'm doing, but I'm just learning, I'm just a
And
human.
and that's even, I actually think that's the good part about it. Like you, I'm going to do therapy with men in the area I want to work in. Um, but it is that you're learning. And that's the authentic part of it, that people can see you can make mistakes and even say sometimes the wrong things, or not work the best way you want as you learn. But I think people who are also trying to overcome their own issues see that and realize that you're not perfect and they're not perfect. And so that I think that also is a benefit in many ways. But yes, I mean, I've been told. So I knew nothing about. So mine is early childhood trauma. So it's different to this journey you've gone through. But I knew nothing about it at all, and I'm much older than you, and I'd never even heard of it until I wrote the book and problems came up, and then I started trying to find out what was going on with me, and then discovered this stuff. And now I've come to realize just how many people will suffer from it, and also the impact it has on you as an adult. And of course, now I start to see it in so many people. When you talk to them, they open up. When you start talking about your own experience, they start to open up and tell you that they had a similar experience or something along those lines. And it's just amazing how those conversations come very quickly. It's as if you attract people who want you to talk to them about it. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah,
they come out of the woodwork.
yeah, like and I think that there's a demand over the projection of the last, 50 to 100 years for us to pretend to be people we're not, because if we
Yeah.
look back, generation to generation, like your generation, then your parents' generation and their parents' generation, never has it been acceptable to talk about how we are feeling. And
Mm.
certainly the understanding of self-love and self-care, if we go back, 3, 4 generations, it's just as confusing as it is today, and that's because it was highly undervalued. But I believe that you and I are in the same field of work, because everything that actually happened with me was the result of emotional traumas. Like, and
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
I believe that that is the core root issue of anyone experiencing any form of addiction whatsoever. Anything that'll distract you from uncomfortable feelings or an inability to process experience on the inside will, become habitual in the necessity to distract from that inability to do so. And that's where we do find readily available substances, alcohol, even gambling and porn and food.
Sex, all of those things. I mean, in my case, it was. To be quite honest, I left home and school when I was 13. In my case, was running away, was leaving everything, and it's still been a trend of mine through my adult life that I couldn't. I had no boundaries. I had no love or anything at home, so I was unable to build relationships as I matured. And had, even though I had relationships, they weren't good. I always felt that I stood outside of them, looking in, and that's always been my life. So, although, to be quite honest, the only drugs I remember, in Sydney, I was in an apartment block, and I went to a party. Somebody took me along, and there was, a Jamaican guy was there, just come into the country, and had a block of hashish, and it was sitting in the cupboard. And remember this, we're going back now to 70s, okay, when hashish was all the thing. And he unveiled it and unwrapped it from this foil, and I spent most of the evening in the bathroom, just completely ill. So since then, that's my drug experience. So mine was very different. In that, I from a kid from 5, 6, I was always out of the house because it was safer, and so that's how I. That's what and then I filled it with work, and as I grew up, and being a control freak, and all of those things started to happen as well. But you're right; it's exactly right. The hole needs to be filled, and sometimes, sadly, that is through violence and anger too. That's one of them.
I'm curious today, do you find yourself having an ability to create authentic relationships today?
They're better. So obviously, my 3 children, those relationships are great. I mean, even though I've divorced, I'm able to have a loving relationship because I made a real effort to make sure they knew I loved them and I was always there for them, and all of that. It's not it's not ideal still. I find that I still, so one of my one of my processes was I'd meet someone, get involved, and then within 3 weeks start looking for reasons to find an argument to end the relationship. And that was a circle of constantly happening. Don't do that now, but I'm also very much aware of not getting into a relationship unless I'm really feeling like I can have an adult relationship. So it still has its impact.
That's interesting. I have very, very similar patterns and behaviors in my previous life as well, because anytime someone was getting close to me, I would figure out a way to burn the whole thing down, and
Yeah.
really turn the attention onto ways that would have them believe that they were the problem, because it was just running away. I
Yeah.
ran away from my feelings and my authenticity and my truth from the time I was 10, 11, 12 years old. But the difficulty was is I didn't have a language to communicate about the uncomfortable feelings or this confusion that I had within me. So I created these patterns and behaviors to avoid, to run, to self-destruct, to self-sabotage, to destroy relationships, to create toxicity and chaos, because toxicity and chaos came naturally. And it was easier to do than self-love and self-care,
Mm,
or have
yeah.
an
Yeah.
understanding of love and care, because we're not taught that. If the parents I was born into were never taught self-love and self-care, well, then where do I pick up these tools? So
And if they don't show that love to you, or they're not available to you, of course, you don't build an understanding of relationships or connection or any of that. That's the void.
yeah, I think my greatest work, having quit or not quit, I made peace with my destructive past, and I became a student of love. That's a daily practice, of an awareness of understanding of self and self love, and how to use love as a tool in very difficult situations and uncomfortable feelings and experiences. And that's something that I still cultivate today. But that's the thing I'm the most proud of in this life. Is
And you should be, because it's so hard. Like, it's really difficult not only to be self-aware, to understand it, but then to also keep doing it and develop. One of the things that the inner child, the wounded inner child, as it's often referred to, will needs all the care. You need to reparent yourself and care for yourself again, and give the love to yourself. But it is virtually, as you say, a daily matter, because if you don't, the child can get lost. You can go back to some of those areas that you were trying to work on. I mean, I don't believe I'll ever be fully healed. I think some of the patterns are very deep, and there are things that happened in my youth after I left home that have also created problems. So I think a lot of those mean that they are entrenched in it throughout your nervous system, throughout your body, and you can't just release them. And I was talking to somebody the other day. I still work on them, and she, because of an event that happened to me at 13, she said that left you with control issues. You need to control. And I didn't understand this then as a kid at 13. And even now, I struggle with it sometimes. But she said, you need to control everything around you in your environment. It's the only way that you can feel comfortable. And you have to let that go. You have to try and work on that and work on that. But as you just said, it's not easy. It's day by day. And yeah.
Well, and I think for me, okay, I'll share an example with you in my life where I was controlled. But my father, him and I had a very difficult relationship growing up, and it was because he was controlled in his life. So his model of parenting came from what he witnessed from his
Yeah.
parents. Now, there is no manual for parenting, but for the longest time, I thought there friggin' one better had have existed, and I was so confused as why my dad never read that friggin' manual, because he was trying to do all these things that didn't seem like it was a good parenting perspective. And I actually lived in blame and victim mentality for quite some time. And I blame my father for that, for restricting me, for holding me back, and not allowing me to be free and make destructive decisions for myself. I realized it was his idea of care and comfort and safety and security, but my idea of adventure and experience was far different than that of his understanding of parenting. And I held that against him for quite some time. And anyone moving forward throughout my journey, because I created an immense amount of emotional traumas along the way as well, because of my destructive nature and the patterns and behaviors that I had not processed, and I thought they were normal to me. So when individuals would try to control me, I would immediately become rebellious towards anyone that was trying to put restrictions on me. But one of the greatest tools that I've found throughout my journey of daily self practice, because a lot of people ask, like, what is the journey within? What is spiritual discovery or personal understanding? For me, it began with accountability. And anytime I was facing an experience where there was a situation, a moment, a human, whatever it was that was causing a reaction within me, I immediately looked at that as a teacher, and I trained myself not to react, or if I did, I would allow it, become accountable, and say, okay, why did that disrupt me? Like, where in my life does control have an issue with me today? And I followed it back, and it was because of my father. So what I was able to do was go to my father and say, hey, like, I understand that your father controlled you, and that was your method of parenting that you witnessed when you were a child. And I see how wrong that was, but you did the best you could with what you had. So, I'm sorry that I held that against you for so long, because I know you're just trying to do the best you can and you love me, or that was your idea of love. And I told him, I said, like, I'm going to break the generational trauma by becoming accountable in my life to not continue that practice, but also talk to you about it, because I think it's important for us to have these conversations, because I think you did it because I never spoke my truth to begin with. And that not only healed, I mean, my dad was like, what? Like, where did you, what? How did you like figure this out? And it was like, well, because I took time to reflect and really look at places of me that needed to be healed, because I was so reactive to this state of being and I didn't like myself like that, but I knew it was an opportunity to heal. And not only did I heal that generation within him, but within myself, but for my kids as well, because now I don't teach that to my kids. We have open conversations surrounding, like,
Mm.
hey, dad made mistakes because grandpa made mistakes, and making mistakes is a really normal function within society. But the best thing we can do with a mistake is use it as an advantage for us to all grow from. So it was an interesting perspective, and it was a wonderful tool that I began to use, and it's a practice.
And it's interesting. I mean, the forgiveness is so important. To forgive yourself as well, and you do need those boundaries when you're growing up, and also you need to be allowed to do those mistakes, and then you find your boundaries. But I, like you, my father actually was given away by his father and given with his sister to another family who I met when I was a very young kid in England, and they were very austere, very like Victorian couple. So when I look back, then it didn't make any impact to me, other than I was scared of her. But now when I look back, I realize he would have had no love. He would have had nothing. And in those days, it was so bad that my sister found out all of this when she did some genealogy and traced him back. And he had this whole family living in Wales that he never knew existed. And then he told us this story of this man who came to England and took him out for the day, an older man. And we're talking around towards the end of World War II. And what he found out much later was nobody told him, but that was his brother. And his brother died not much later in the war. And that was the only time he saw him, but he never knew it was his brother. He thought it was just a visiting friend. So he never had love in his life. So you understand all the anger I might have had towards him because of all the stuff that he might have done. You look back and you realize he didn't know anything else. His option of living was just provide food and a house for them so you're safe and secure. But the love and that connection stuff, he never had it. He couldn't provide it. And that's the truth for so many people.
To this day, that is a very normal, common practice. We may not be going to wars as common as we were back when your father was a child, but certainly the idea of parenting today means clothing, food, shelter, and transportation to say sports facilities or an education. Like, parenting is so much more than that. Those basic functions of life, sure, are a requirement for a child who doesn't obtain a driver's license or, have the ability to incur wealth to purchase its own food, for sure, absolutely. But this is the thing that, I have a lot of conversations with parents today. They'll reach out to me because I speak about parenting, because I like to share about the things that I would have liked to have known when I was a child, or the mistakes I've made along my way. And that's a big part of it, is to say, your vulnerability and your experiences of your life will show your children that you're human, because these hierarchies and these titles that we come with, mom, dad, they have ideologies surrounding them for the authoritarians that we may have displayed subconsciously to them. So that closes off that door where it allows them to be human and see us as human and create that authentic connection with them. And I think that that's the most important piece of parenting, because parenting is the most important job in the world.
And it's interesting as well that that with parenting, it can also be the small things that you don't do that can hurt a lot. And the reason I say that is that I remember, and this is just for me. Others may look at it and say, "Well, that shouldn't have impacted you," but we're all different, so different things impact us. I remember when I was a kid in England, I came third in a drawing or painting competition, and my parents didn't turn up at the ceremony. And I remembered that for a long time. That had a really big impact. Forget the feedings or whatever else. That really had an impact. And so all of these sorts of things do, as a parent, those little things where you're not there, where you're not there for your child, really do. And you might think, oh, look, I'll go to the next one or I'll do whatever. But they have their impacts on the child. And as you say, it's important to understand all of that and to give love and self-care as much as it is the food and the house and everything else. I mean, some of the happiest families I've seen live in very small environments with very little around them, but their kids and their family are so happy. And I'd have to say, in my lifetime, I think I've come across maybe 3 groups where I think the children are brought up properly, like they're happy, they're loving, their family is really connected. There aren't many of them though, and that you come across.
Yeah, like the systems that we're sort of brought up into are, people like to blame the system and the way it is and how we're so busy all the time, but the system isn't making us busy. We make choices that have consequences. And if we value, things external from us that take our time and energy, when that time and energy could be put into like having a proper dinner at a table, like it doesn't even matter if you're having crackers and cheese. If you got 4 people at a table having crackers and cheese together, laughing, cutting cheese together, setting the crackers out, making memories, checking with each other, like you've got it all. That time and energy is so important when we look at where are we spending that time and energy. And I think a lot of where people are drained are they're living in the past or the future within their minds. So they're stressed out about work, they're stressed out about finance or mortgage or all of these things that haven't yet happened, yet they're relevant because they're giving it time, attention, and energy to think about. But if we just really, I understand that it's so difficult for so many people, and I went on this journey myself to live in the present moment. You really see how free you are from all of which has not been done yet. And the people around you are the first ones to benefit from it because you have so much liberated time, but energy as well. And liberated energy, clean, clear energy is just so beautiful, and it's a gift. And that's a lot of what I talk about as well, is how to obtain that.
And it also helps, as you say, attract people to you. You mentioned sitting around a table with cheese and crackers. Just as an example, I remember when I was growing up that on maybe 2 occasions, my father would join us for a game of something like Monopoly or something else. And I remember I would be so excited that he was there. And then when he would stand up and leave, I would feel so, sort of heartbroken or disappointed that he was going, not because he did anything, but because it was showing attention and we got so little of it. And so, as you're right, I mean, it doesn't have to be a huge banquet or taking everybody out to a special event. Just sitting around the table, even chatting, and as you say, sharing something like cheese and crackers can be a momentous occasion for a child, that they feel part of everything.
Yeah, I think that's the most common thing though, is to not be seen and not be heard. And when we think of trauma and we talk about trauma, many people have their mind quickly associates to physical and sexual abuse. And it's like, okay, yes, that's traumatic, but trauma is whatever is traumatic to the human being. And not being seen and not being heard in any generation at any time is traumatic, because we've come here to try and understand love. And if the individual that tells me they love me is constantly busy and never has time to be in the same space as me or finds it awkward to be with me, well, then certainly I am creating a misunderstanding of love within myself, and now I'm confused. And it's very difficult for us to speak our truth, so we carry this with us for quite some time.
And of course, if it's ongoing in the family, you create your own reality. So as a child, you create another a reality. And I mean, I just using myself again. I would go into the fields and the forests, winter and summer, and play on my own, and always play the hero who protected everybody. And because you wanted to have that feeling, and so it and that's what you do. You create another reality, and of course, then you talk about true self. That's what you lose. As a child, you lose the true who you are, the curious, the interesting, the happy. That little child then changes to somebody else because they need to protect themselves, and that's the great shame. And finding it is then, as you grow into adulthood, it's not that easy. That's when you have to do the sort of work you've done. Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that that's where a lot of people look at my story, 23 years of drug addiction, homeless, 16 years with the needle. Like, yeah, it visually, and when we hear that, the idea that we have surrounding that journey, it sounds very difficult. We have a visual display of what that kind of addiction looks like in society, but really that was the action of the distraction from myself. So many of us are creating those same behaviors based on the same fundamentals of what we didn't have in life, but certainly the experiences are different of how we try to distract from that. But for me, like, I died in this life. I overdosed like 33 times. So I physically died in this life many, many times. But I when I was in when I got out of jail and I had this awakening and I had surrendered my love to I surrendered my love to Jesus, but what that meant was I surrendered myself to love. I didn't surrender myself to religion or a Bible or a conformed way of life or a pronounced way of life, because like I'd explained before, rules and regulations, they still don't fit this philosophy today unless they're that of love. So that death that happened within that jail cell was my ego, because the ego was damaged. And I'll hear in a lot of cases people talk about, like, oh, you just have to kill the ego, or just let your ego go. It's like, well, yeah, but like or hide from your ego or things like this. It's like, I look at it a different way. I looked at it like I had no idea what the function of ego was. So I knew if I built relationships in this life, relationships come with trust, communication, understanding, respect, like a connection. So I thought, wow, if I can create a relationship with my ego, then I'll be able to see its function from many different perspectives. And that way, when my ego does get damaged along the way, that's okay, because we'll be able to learn from it together. And that work, yes, is difficult, but when we value things in this life to be anything that we want to be, I think that that's where it begins.
Yeah, absolutely. And I mean, we need our ego anyway, but we also need a healthy and an ego that allows us to do good things and to feel good, not as you say the other way. I mean, it's but it for people to do that sort of work really takes, to do the work you're talking about, does take a lot of people maybe to go to the point where they get to where they have to. And we often hear that story where you get to the bottom and then you start to look back up. It's not always necessarily true, I suppose, but it's such a big piece of work to even look at yourself when you're down and things are tough, to look at yourself and actually start to think about what's going on. Because you're still, I would imagine, still caught up in that whole need to get away from it anyway. There would be that conflict, I would imagine, going on, that you still need to find ways to ease the pain that's inside you whilst you're still trying to heal.
For me personally, right now,
Yeah. Well, then when you first started looking at it.
actually, no. And I'll tell you
Okay.
why. When I'd surrendered my love to Jesus, I was shown tools. And certainly understood that the self-sabotage and self-abuse for things that I had done in my past, I were no longer necessarily to my function of living anymore. That was cleared up. That had gone. But I still had areas of darkness, yes, like you say. But the tools that I was shown were accountability. They were forgiveness, compassion, understanding, and one of the greatest ones was that I was going to make mistakes. So I could go into these areas with love as well, and use these opportunities and these tools to grow through that pain, so I didn't have to carry it. So basically what it did was it showed me the pain, because I knew it. I knew it so well. And we all know our pain so well if we're willing to be accountable to
Yeah,
witness
admit
it.
it.
Right? Exactly. We
Mm.
have to be willing to admit it. Okay, fine. And that's so difficult for us to do. And why is that? Because we don't like discomfort. Anything uncomfortable or anything that would have us feel something authentic and raw, we hide from. And that's just a practice from our emotional upbringing as a child, because we are not brought up in communities of healing practices. We're very divided over every single thing that we can possibly be divided over, but that restricts us from speaking our truth. So in that moment, I was so grateful for all the things that I had done and I'd been through, because I thought, wow, okay, like 23-year drug addict, you know what I mean? This will be fine to be myself and step out. People were looking at me for this other identity that I had created. So now I'm a student of love. So within this student of love, I'm just going to go through all these areas, and one by one, I'm going to work through them. But that just meant that I was going to walk and live life from a very honest and authentic perspective. But I didn't always get that right, because I mean, how do you speak your truth and be authentic after 35 years of not practicing it? But I just used the people and the experiences around me as an opportunity to test myself on who I wanted to be. And I looked up, so Jesus for me, the only thing I'm grateful for the words that I spoke 100%. But the other gratitude that goes into this man that was here, 2,500 years ago or whatever, I don't even know too much about it. All I know is that there was a man that didn't have much, and he was okay going into dark places with less, with disease, with famine, with all of these things that society was looking down on. He went into, and he was okay with that, and he tried to bring love and light into dark areas. And he did that not with money, but with time and energy. And he cultivated that within himself so that he was able to share it. And I thought, okay, man, like, I was given a gift in this life to understand something more. I'm going to become a student of that, of a spiritual understanding of life. But that wasn't just of Jesus. It was of all the teachers, Buddha, Krishna. I mean, Buddha teaches me about the relinquishment of attachments, my materialistic approach and relationship with life. So I learned that through that man's experience. And Krishna teaches me about sex and the function and relationship I have with that. Is that a lower mind, or is that a higher mind that I choose to keep myself in? These people were here to share things with us. Religion certainly created its own organization out of philosophies, for sure. And be that as it may, whatever that is for individuals, that's for them. But for me, this is how I've traversed my life, and it's been very, very beautiful.
And I think you're right. The core of all of those religions is love and sharing. And you talk about also letting go of material desires. When you do that, I think you again free yourself up as well. You may still have them, but that you don't need them, or don't desire them, or don't be envious of others who have those items. That's when you can really free yourself up. I would like to ask you one question, because when you first started to decide that you needed to be accountable, how difficult was that? Because you haven't, for all those years, you have used drugs and alcohol to escape that accountability, to fill any pain. So when you decided to, when you realized that you needed to be accountable, how difficult was that to start to begin at the early stages?
Well, that's a great question. And I'll tell you, it was very easy, because the difficulty didn't lie in the ability to be accountable. The difficulty lied in me hiding from the fact that I couldn't be accountable. So I was able to see the scales, or the perspective of my life, from two different angles. And when I looked at where not being accountable had gotten me, I was reliving an emotional pattern of a repetitive cycle of self-sabotage and destruction, all because I was too afraid to be accountable for my role in experiences and affecting emotional, damage or trauma or whatever it may be in others' lives. So in that moment when I decided to be accountable, I basically took my whole past. I have 3 kids. I lost 2 kids with one woman. I was married to her for 7 years. I was a great father. I love my children so much, and I was so good, and it was just such a beautiful thing to have them. But my emotional traumas superseded the love that they had for me because they can't change me. And I really thought, when we were having our first child, that was going to be it. That was everything that I needed in this life because she was going to teach me about myself. And she certainly did. My daughter taught me a lot about who I was and what I stood for, but it still didn't allow me to have a language for the feelings and the accountability that needed to take place within me. So it was easier to hide in that discomfort of addiction. So, when you're looking at accountability, you look at yourself and you go, man, like I chose drugs over an inability to process emotions. I chose to be inauthentic and not loyal and not honest because I was too afraid to be my true self. And I think that just took place from such a young age that we begin to practice this behavior of creating an identity of someone we're not. So even though it's damaging to our personal growth, it's normal because we practiced it.
It's the
So
only thing we know. Yeah.
that's right. And I just decided to look at that and I asked myself in that jail cell, who are you today, Justin? The past has already happened, man. So the only thing that you can do is learn from every experience that you find discomfort in. And that's what I did. I looked at it all and I was like, okay, I damaged this, I damaged this, I damaged this. Why did I do these things? And I just eventually followed it all the way back to my childhood. And it was the root core issue. And it was a beautiful thing because I knew in that moment, I believe for many of us, I was accountable for not speaking my truth and not being authentic. Regardless if somebody did not teach me how to do that, it was still my responsibility to know that my truth was the thing that I was living for. So I knew from that point in jail that I was going to be honest and authentic in every situation. And I didn't always get it right. But that's being a student of love, is that, we allow ourselves to make those mistakes and hold ourselves accountable even when we do. And we go, okay, why couldn't I tell that person the truth? Why was I afraid to hurt their feelings? Oh, because I'm people pleasing again? I don't need to people please because that's not who I am. I need to speak my truth to see what that feels like because life is an experience. And if we get caught up in the awkward moments or the moments where life doesn't go like we want it to, then we'll never truly know what we can do in this life. So I just looked at it like that and I was like, okay, whether it was women, like, making a relationship after I'd cleaned my life up or talking to my father or my mother or making friends or anything. I just thought everything, I'm going to learn from everything because there's 8 billion people on the planet. So it doesn't matter if I make mistakes. Like I'm just going to get better until I find out who I am.
It's great, and yeah, and that's what I said at the very beginning. I think your story is quite amazing. I mean, and look at we both realise there are lots of people who have gone through lots of things, and they're working hard as well. But I mean, I don't particularly like the word inspirational, but it is that sort of stuff that where people realise you have to put in the work too. It's not going to come easily, as you've just described. But when you do, as you say, the benefits of living who you are, the real you, I would think are enormous. And I don't think and I'm nearly twice your age, I think, but I don't think I'm really I'm getting there, but I don't think I'm living the true me yet. There's still these things that I'm balancing. But the difference between me now and 3 years ago is like a chasm that's a mile wide.
Yeah.
It's just so huge. And I imagine that you can look back and see the differences, obviously. So it's just, it is so important to do exactly what you're saying. Find your true self and be accountable for everything you do and speak your truth to people because that is the only way to live your life, really, no matter how you go. Yeah.
It is. And that's been taken away from us because our ideas of families, like the way we're brought up is just so I don't know, it seems dysfunctional in a sense. Like we come in born into these four walls with these two individuals with just two perspectives, two narratives, two learned behaviors, two experiences that are going to teach us about everything. It's like, wait a minute. And then when we want to get like knowledge, we have to go to this thing called an institutional way of learning, and it's very compartmentalized. So I saw that whole model and I was like, this doesn't work. Like, you travel to places like Africa or Asia where their education system isn't nearly what ours is, yet and they certainly don't have the financial capabilities of incurring wealth as we do, but they have something so much more because community offers education and perspective and communication and understanding. And I look to the world as my teacher. I'm not a student of life, I'm a student of love because I believe we all came here to learn about love. Now, we can't blame the scenario or the reality that we're all living in because the reality that we're all living in is an opportunity to change it. And people will often say to me, like, like, how do you think you're going to change the world? And it's like, well, I don't need to put all my attention and energy out into this big, huge thing. Rather, I just turn it inside of myself. And when I understand myself and what love means to me, and I cultivate this within me, then I can share that with my brothers and sisters. And they'll be inspired to find it within themselves and do the work. And we create a movement just out of us. Like, we don't need establishments and organizations. Like, it's just you.
And I've had it said to me as well when I say I'm going to work with men and do this stuff. They say, well, sure, that's great, but talking to one person can't change anything, helping one person. But of course it can. As you're right, as you go forward and the people you meet, everybody you touch and come into contact with, you can change them even a little bit so they start looking at themselves and then they change and they change others, and so it goes. And I'm a strong believer in the ripple effect that can occur from all of that. And I think when we started this conversation and you sort of talked about how families were set up generation after generation, and it's interesting and it's very European, unfortunately. But when you think about indigenous cultures 40,000 years ago, 20,000 years ago, perhaps they had it right in the fact that they were a community, and they all raised both the children and looked after the elderly, and they all cared about everybody in their community because they're all important. I know, obviously, very different scenarios, but that sort of thinking is what we need to have that community that looks after everybody in that community and raises them as their own, basically.
I absolutely agree with you, and I am working so hard to be involved with Indigenous culture. I mean, let's be real, Europeans came over into these, countries, whether it was South America, Central America, or North America, and we came in the name of the church, and the church's first motive was to assimilate cultures to follow a certain narrative and practice. And when that didn't work, well, we just created genocide on a way of life. And we are currently all living under this systematic ideology of a European culture. And that's okay. It's no blame and victim mentality. What took place, took place. That's fine. But we have an opportunity, like you say, to look back on these cultures and say, wow, they worked in relationship with Mother Nature and they seen the value of sustainability, but not from profit standpoint, of a place of love and peace and a mutual respect to give energy and receive energy and create some beauty. And I think that the machine or this systematic way of life that we're trying to find purpose within is so dysfunctional within the human, like the ability to be an organic human within it, like function. It's because it's like forced labor in a sense. There's no real connection to something more, and I think that's what a lot of people are seeking.
I absolutely agree, and as you say, it was the connection in Australia. Our Indigenous call it connection to country, and it's so important, and respect of that country, and support of that country, which is what they did for thousands of years. And we can learn, but we are slowly, even in this country, we're starting to now appreciate that. But it is a very slow process, and the European model doesn't work, and hasn't worked. And so, I have great faith. I like astrology. I often follow astrology, and we're moving into a different dimension. We're moving into Aquarius, and we're moving into a dimension that should hopefully bring. I mean, we can't see it with what's going on in the world at the moment, but over the next 10 to 15 years, hopefully things will move in the right direction. But we certainly need to do that. There's just too many hurt people on this planet at the moment.
Yeah, and you're right. There is an absolute shift happening since the age of Aquarius has come into fruition. And myself with the miracle, or whatever we want to call it, that happened to me. I mean, that's what it was. Like, holy, I spoke some words, and then these actualizations took place in my life. Obviously, it took action for me to complete this fruition and maintain this course of life. But this, I'm not especially unique. Like, this is happening to many, many people.
Mm.
And I think that what we're witnessing within the reality of society right now is the end of a systematic way of life. And it's extremely difficult because the powers that be also know that the systems are crumbling and they're defective in every form, in every area, in every continent. So we are all the byproduct living this very difficult life as the system crumbles within itself. But when something ends, something begins. And I think that people are really afraid of that unknown, which is why they keep going and hanging on to this system, no matter how much it oppresses them or damages them, or they disbelieve it or whatever it may be. It's because, they can't let go of something to allow something new to happen. But the reality of the situation is we're moving into it. So we can either hold on to this sinking ship and go down with it, or we can let go and let love and move into something new by moving into ourselves and clearing out the darkness and the trauma and the difficult, uncomfortable feelings that we have within ourselves, and be ready for this new earth because it's taking place.
Yeah, and I think ultimately, the success will come from love and care, and because, as you say, the old institutions are crumbling, and they're starting to crumble quicker now. You can look around the world, and they're starting to actually crumble quite quickly. And yes, something that's taking its place may not be the final. It may even look worse at one point, but it is starting to move in that direction. And it's what we need. We need to have a change. We've existed the way we are, and it's not working. But it's like everything. It is time, and there will be setbacks, and it's a matter of doing what, like you do. It's about talking about the need to be self-aware, self-care, self-love, and love to others.
Yeah, and for me, I just tried to, like, I evaluated my situation with what I have, with what I can do, and I decided, like, okay, if I become the experiment of an example, then possibly we don't need anyone to follow anyone in this life, but we just need examples of what people can lead their life to. So
Mm.
rather than talk about that or wait for that to happen, I decided just to tune myself into that and just say, I'm just a human experience, but like this is what I believe in. I believe in myself, and I believe in love, and I believe in us as a whole, and I know if other people believe that too, like, we can move past this thing, and all we have to do is really overcome fear with love. Love is the medication. We just have to learn how to use the prescription.
And we just, yeah, and we have to give it out without expecting return, and to people who aren't comfortable with it. And there's a whole, it's just, yeah, as you say, existing in that moment. So but it's still amazing, the things that you may have gone through to achieve what you're doing. That still is, it's still pretty a pretty major a major shift and a major delivery of what you need.
Thank you. I
That's
think I'm
great.
I like, when I was sticking needles in my arm for 16 years, like, hiding out, crying in a back alley just because I was so fucked over, I would never have thought I'd be sitting here today having conversations about how it was the greatest thing that ever happened to me.
Yeah, and it's interesting, isn't it? We often say the same thing. You go through that to be able to be who you are now and do this. That's easy to say when you're starting to be the person who you're doing it, but when you're sitting in that alleyway, you're not thinking about, oh, well, this will lead me to this better life. You're thinking about how shit everything is and why am I here, and just, give me more, just kill the pain. I mean, that's all you're thinking about, isn't it?
That's correct. Yeah. And I've been thinking about that as well lately for individuals who are stuck in this pattern of thinking. It's we really lack communities where, when we are in our darkest hour, or we are in this heavy state, we need places we can come to, and we can have perspectives of life where we can see a transformation or an ability to change a way our life is being lived. I mean, that's also why I'm really grateful for my life, is because society deems it to be the bottom, like the bottom of everything. Like being homeless and a drug addict, you're good luck. How are you getting out of that kind of thing? But
Yeah.
really, it just shows people like that's the power of perspective. That's the power of possibility, and that's the power of belief. And in belief, all I did was turn my belief system within myself. I no longer looked at an old man in the sky judging me. I thought, no, 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 no. Like my perception of God was, if we are made in God's image, then God must be made up of a divine masculine and a divine feminine energy. So that would allow me to believe that we are all energy and everything is energy. So that energy is within me because I am made up of energy. So if God is a creator, then I am a creator of my own reality. So what can I do? What can I do? Like whatever I'm living in is because I'm creating that. So that mentality is what I'm trying to share with people, because no one was talking about that with me when I was on the street and I was so caught up in my own destruction. It was I was creating it, and I was highly aware of my self-sabotage, absolutely, but nowhere did I believe that I could create something out of that, because I was never shown that that was a possibility. And I think that we need to encourage people more that are in this destructive state, like, hey, like you actually have a lot of education surrounding very difficult situations that can be useful to another person so they can find purpose within their life, because a lot of addicts or people in despair struggle to see purpose.
Oh, I would imagine, absolutely. I mean, and you mentioned it's not only drugs and alcohol; it's gambling, it's addiction to a whole range of different things. Addiction to work, being a perfectionist, that also can have dire consequences, not only on their family but your own individual personality. So yeah, it's all of those things, and as you say, seeking a way out. But it is. It is, you have to have that focus, you have to have that change in you, don't you?
For
And see.
Yeah, and for me, like you were saying before about, often we need to these transformations happen when we're in our bottom. It's my purpose to figure out an algorithm or become an example, and find the creative, perception of how to alchemize a very difficult experience for many, many people, so that I can't change people, but I can offer a perspective or perception of life that would have them inspired to do the work within themselves so that they can,
Yeah.
overcome that at a very rapid rate. And I think that that's what I live for these days, is that. And, a lot of us feel like we're so drained from work, but what I tell people that are at employment, which is freaking everybody doing something they don't want to do, it's like, yes, I realize that we're all part of this system that makes us do things that we don't want to do, but that's just one side of it. You can go to work and learn about yourself every single day. You use every opportunity with every situation to speak your truth, to be authentic, to figure out energy, to see humans for humans. Now, if you can learn about authenticity, you can learn about honesty on someone else's dime. Like they're paying you to learn about yourself. Of course, we have to do the job, but you get pretty good at the job, after the first couple of years. So you go on autopilot to do it anyways. Why not do something else at work? And again, that's just, discipline within one's life. And the lack of discipline is where we are all sort of finding ourselves within these comforts and complacencies, and how that is damaging to our personal growth.
Yeah, I mean, you said it before, change is something that we are not good at and don't like, whether it be the world, whether it be our individual selves. We struggle with it sometimes, but yes, you know, you just do need to do that.
But I look at that so much. It's like, how many humans are going to this thing called a job every single day and they don't like what they do?
Like it.
They hold on. So their life has become so emotionally unstable because every day they go and do this thing they don't want to do because they're too afraid to quit that job for fear of financial whatever, or what society will view them as, to take a chance on themselves. And that's what I did. I always just took a chance on myself, even when I was in my destructive state. It didn't matter. Like, I was partners in companies and all these other things because I was always moving to this to try something new. And sure, a lot of the things that I was trying were not good for me, but I experienced a lot. And I think at the end of our timeline, we look at life as a story, and how many pages of experience have you created along that way? Because that's what you're left with at the end. The pension, the retirement, the money, the bullshit relationships, none of that matters, and I think it's really just comes down to value and having these conversations at the end. And you and I having these conversations today really puts that out into the world for people to connect with something more.
Absolutely. And of course, once you find what you are meant to do, what you really love or want to do, the path is quite easy. You start to spread and it starts to happen for you, and people come to you. And as you're finding the people you're talking to, it happens that way. But we are fearful of taking that step or stepping off the cliff and just doing it. We always want to have protection on the way down and make sure we're okay. And you can't do that. And that's not the way it works. You actually have to take the step and just, as you say, believe in yourself and take on the challenge, whatever it may be. And the interesting thing I know sometimes through my life anyway has been that when I'm still holding on, sometimes the universe comes along and gives me a shove, and something happens that pushes me out the door, and I have to make the decisions and change and so on. And there's been a couple of times that's occurred. And you look at it when it happens as frightening and, I don't want this to happen, and why did this happen to me and poor me? But then when I look back on a couple of years later, I realized that was one of the best things that happened to me because it's led me to this and that.
Yeah.
So yeah, it is interesting, the
Yeah.
dynamic.
And I think it's important, like, a lot of people, when the universe does give them a push, it does push them out of their comfort zone. But, in many cases, we fear that even more, and we pull away from ourselves even more. And for me, that's just an opportunity for us to learn. Like, our emotions are always trying to teach us something. So if they're all valid, absolutely. But if we're not learning from them, then we'll just bury them to the point where it will destroy the organic vessel. And mental health is a relevant thing in 80% of homes in their immediate or extended families today, simply because an emotion is energy. And if you don't process that energy, because energy can't be just destroyed, it can only be transmuted. But if you push that emotional energy down within the core of your being, it attaches to the organs in the vessel, and it
Yes,
begins to,
it's a,
yeah, it sits there and it acts like a hurricane, and it causes problems within your nervous system, within your biochemistry. And this is where we are seeing a direct result with health complications, that as well as the amount of chemicals that are being fed into the food, absolutely, and the poor water systems for sure. But I believe we are one of the biggest catalysts of our disease.
I think it's American lady, Dr. Nadine Burke. I may have the name wrong, but she did a lot of studies on children who came from abusive or difficult families, and but she looked at the physical component, as you were saying. But even in young children, she found that many of them were stunted in their physical growth, and that they had health problems at young ages. Again, all relating back to this abuse. So you're right. If as you grow, if that all of those traumas are pushed down, and we do, and we keep them, they don't go anywhere. They sit in your body, in your nervous system, and they create physical health problems as well as mental health problems. And I look at older men, and there is even in the US, Australian stats I'm not sure of, but in the US, the rate of older men over 60 taking their own lives has increased dramatically. Now, there will be varying reasons why, but a lot of it, I think, is because this trauma is starting to come out in them, and they, that it is affecting them in so many ways, and so it can't just disappear, as you say. It sits there, and unless we do something, it's like a water balloon that's been filled. Eventually it finds a weak spot, pushes, and bursts open, and the things that we can do when it bursts open can be horrific. That can just really we lose control. We can. And we do things that we don't even know we're doing sometimes. Some of the stuff that's happens can be where it just the trauma takes over. Like it's like PTSD from war zones, and it just sits there and breaks out. But yes, it's a huge topic, and it just needs more people like yourself to work on people.
Well, and it also needs more conversation, like even suicide. What suicide needs? I had a guest on named Jacob Dodd, and he's from New Zealand. He made a really valid point, and he said mental health, suicide, men and their feelings, what that needs is conversation. It needs to be talked about. It's even drug addiction. Like, it's so taboo because it carries all these ideologies when really it's just a human experience. And especially with men. We've been led to believe for the last how many generations? I'll say 5 for the sake of giving a number, but for the last 5 generations to carry our emotions and bury them because we can bear the weight of that pain, when in reality it's like you're carrying an emotional energy, and that energy it far exceeds that of an organic vessel in which you can physically carry, because emotionally it will break you down to the point that it'll have you feeling so low, which is where we get into these low vibrational states, which is why we see men act out in the way they act out. And now we see that with women as well. But, it's so common for men in the past to become abusive and destructive. And for me, it's, of course, a result of your experience and what you've been taught. But you also push yourself to a point where, like you say, the balloon breaks. And I'll jump off a bridge. I'll take my own life. I'll beat up my wife. I will X, Y, and Z, whatever it looks like. And that is the result of carrying an emotional baggage. And I cannot believe we've been led to believe that that is acceptable. And now men see it as a sign of weakness. So I've had guys say to me, like, man, that's some woman shit that you're talking about there. Like, that's for women. It's like, oh, bro, like, I feel for you. And actually, a lot of guys, because I am the way I am and the shit that I've been through, a lot of guys will come up to me and they'll be like, they feel like cool to talk about how they're feeling. Like, all kinds of guys, bikers, like it's actually crazy. Like the demographic of men that come up to me, but I love that because they see, like, I am the way I am. And again, we just need examples of this in our life to say, hey, you can, follow this generational trauma that's been taking place for quite some time, or you can look at new conventional ways of healing and processing emotions and energies to make your life a whole lot easier and to make authentic connections within the people that love you. I mean, it's how is that anything but a strength? That is a power in this life.
And it comes back to what we said at the very beginning. Your lived experience, for a biker who has done drugs, has done violence, has done whatever, they can see, well, hang on, this guy's done it too. So he knows some of the stuff I've gone through, maybe not exactly or whatever. So he can talk to me on my level. I can talk to him about drugs and he's not going to judge me. I can talk to him about some of the other things and he's not going to judge me because he's been there, he's done that, he's seen it. That's what's so important. People can't take it from somebody sitting, in a suit and a tie and saying, well, I think it all relates back to you doing this and that. Yeah, but what do you really know about me? How do you know how I felt? How do you know that, I needed the drugs for this or I needed this for that? So that's why the message from someone like yourself is so important. I think that's why it's really vital, because those people need someone to talk to. And you're right, many men, especially, so trying to get through to men in their 60s, to talk about their feelings is that's really difficult. I go to men's groups and I give them stories about what I've seen and what happened to me and some of the other things. But you can see they still don't want. Some come up and say it's really important, but it's usually the women who come up to
Yeah.
me at these groups and say, like, thank you for that. That may start the conversation with my partner or with my husband. Do you know what I mean? They've got a reason to talk to them about feelings. So, and if that's the way in, then that's the way in, whatever it takes.
Yeah, all like I
Yeah.
tell everybody, I'm just a gardener, man. All I do is plant seeds. Like that's all I can do. And I have seen seeds be planted and then watered 6, 7 months later, and that's everything. Now,
Mm.
it's up to my artistry to get more clever and better at figuring out a way to have the water planted right with the seed so that it's growing immediately. And that's my work. That's where I find myself, and the same with the work that you're doing as well, right? But it's within this continued approach of what we're doing, that's really going to change things. Also, when we look at drug addiction and say, bikers, or going against what is acceptable by society in terms of a life, there's a visual display of a rebellion or of something not emotionally correct within these individuals. For me, seeing, people go to work every day and put on this identity or become this person that they're not, and have a mortgage and have two cars in the driveway and have kids and be totally disconnected from everything, that to me is a worse situation to be in, because you've done everything society has asked you to do, yet you're still hiding from who you are. So you actually hide a whole lot better because you're fitting in with the rest of society. And that is such a common practice of mankind this to this day, because it's encouraged for us to fit into this model but still
Yeah.
not be who you are. So I
That's
think,
right. And it's encouraged not to be who you are. It's encouraged to be this person who does that, goes to work, provides, does this, and joins the right clubs, seen at right places, acts in the right way. And of course that is now starting to break down.
yeah.
But yeah, it's been amazing to talk to you. It's been great.
Yeah, you as well. No, I know. I absolutely appreciate Pain, Loss, and Desire. Where are people? This is your book, and this is written out of your experiences.
Yeah, yeah. So it's a memoir. It really covers. I cover some of the early childhood stuff, the reason why I left home at 13 and left school, and then but also in Australia, I was living in a smallish town and then went to a big city with a friend, and he took all the money and disappeared. So I was left alone in the city, and it's a lot about that and about what I did. So it's not a memoir in the sense of I went through this and I did this and this happened. It's written as a bit of a novel of my experience. But really, and there are obviously elements in it where I try and relate that to, because of the way I was treated as a kid and what happened, so that I use it really as sort of the link to talk to men about, well, I've been through some of this stuff. I mean, raped in a hotel room by a man, other stuff that happened, so that I can be honest with them and say, look, I went through all this because I didn't have love at home, because I was beaten at home, because I became a different kid and I ran away, and I kept running away most of my life. So I talk about the fact that it goes into adulthood. So I use it as that sort of, like it's not as extreme as what you have been through, but it's about telling them, look, I've lived this. This is the result, and so we talk about how we can work with the inner child, and what we can do. So
But
that's the idea.
I believe its extremities are one and the same, because I think that all of our experiences that are traumatic to us in their own way. I mean, being raped in a hotel room, by another man. Like there's no small things. That almost happened to me in jail, but I fought my way out of it, thankfully. But I was almost experiencing the same thing, and that would have turned my experience into another form of education, which wouldn't have been very fun by any means, but it would have been something I had to carry and process over time. I think the fact that you talk about that, though, I commend you for that, because it's something society has us find shame and guilt within. And I think that displaying that voice is where we can really see power and courage. And I think that courage and bravery is highly underlooked and underrated these days. But I think that people just don't, we associate courage and bravery to, going into war and going into battle, but the battle's within these days. And when we can be courageous and brave within the ability to speak our truth surrounding our experiences to help other people grow, it's just such a power to be able to do that. And it carries the same weight as it would us running into battle. You know what I mean? Because we're running into battle for each other, not against each other. And I think that that's really great. So I think it's fantastic that you've written something to have a tool to open up a line of communication about.
It's interesting just that you talk about when something happens like a rape. I mean, because I was in a small town and I was a youngish boy. I was 13, 14. I knew that I couldn't tell anybody. I would have been run out of Darwin, the town I was in, if I'd said to anybody this happened, or I would have been tagged with, that's the boy who got raped in the hotel, blah blah. So I knew I couldn't. So it, on top of the obvious control, sort of you lose control because of what happened, you also can't talk about it with anyone, so you really have to hammer it down. And it, to be quite honest, even now I struggle to be able to bring that back up. It's so deep. So it is true. You can't talk about those things. We couldn't talk about those things, and it's important that men do talk about all of these things, and as much as women too, and understand when we talk about like a woman when she comes forward and says, well, I can't go to anybody because they just won't understand or respect, or I'll feel like the person who did the wrong thing. I can understand a bit of how they feel. It's tough to explain to somebody how damaging it can be, and without you showing signs that it's damaging, that you're living your own life, but the internal damage is extreme. And it only occurred to me once. It's not like it was a succession of things, but the point is that it causes that much damage to someone, and we need to respect that in other people. And yes, I use it as a vehicle to talk about a whole bunch of things. But yeah.
I will also share this with you surrounding that experience. Maybe that'll help you process it in another way. Sometimes individuals are born with a warrior spirit, and what that means is that the spirit is stronger than the vessel, and the vessel will take abuse along the way. But because this warrior spirit is born within that vessel, the damaging things that will happen along that journey will be alchemized, because the spirit will have an ability to share that education with others. So whereas society has us, shame, regret, blame, and victim mentality, these experiences, and we hide from them and we hide from ourselves, I offer individuals another way to look at it, and the soul spirit of the true essence of why we're here is to learn. And to think that we're learning through physical and sexual abuse is crazy, but let's be real, 1 in 5 men are raped, 1 in 3 women are raped. It is very, very common. So never before has it needed more warrior spirits to step forward to have these conversations so that we can change the reality of the generational trauma, that we are to be ashamed of what has happened, and have more individuals speak truth and get louder and louder about it. Because I can totally appreciate you coming from a small town in Darwin. How do you talk about that? Like, we don't have communities like that, but that's what this podcast does. And that's who I am. I am that human being. Like, I'm willing to talk about everything and anything that has happened in my life, because if there's a kid out there, or if there's someone else that can just feel again, like inspiration to be like, wow, the vulnerability, like take the feeling from within me and plant that within them to show them that they've got power within their life. They're not powerless because of the experiences that have faced them. They can do more with it to help others, because that's all we're here to do, is to help each other. And sometimes we do that through very, very difficult experiences. So if I could encourage you to talk about that more and more, you will find a different way to see it and process it through the experience of talking about it.
And yes, thanks. And I mean, I like the term when you take the powerlessness that you may feel and turn it into power, turn it
Right.
into your real truth and your real power. And that's really something that I have to do more of with it, I think. And because you know, it's that whole thing that you sometimes tentatively mention it. You don't. You know what I mean? You sort of go, so this also happened, but then you move on quickly. So the first edition of the book I wrote was basically complete whitewash of everything that happened to me. I read it, maybe I wrote it several years ago and then put it away and then picked it back up and then wrote a better and more in-depth emotional book. But the first one was, as you were just saying, I was powerless to really delve into the pain or of any of it, and pretty much just wrote it like a little boy's tale, like whitewash the whole thing. So it is important to not only own it as well, to understand it and not be fearful of it, and I'm not embarrassed by it or worried by it, but I do need to allow people to understand that this happened and this is why. And I do also believe that everything that occurred, you know, to both of us was to lead us to these points where we can share these stories. I mean, that's absolutely what I believe.
Yeah, and I appreciate you for that. I also think it's important, like, just for when we are around individuals that we are sharing these kind of stories with, and they are open to receive the information because they're looking to us to learn
Mm.
from that experience. I think it's important to share the feelings that we were having, even no matter the level of difficulty that we were going through, the confusion, the fear, the all of it, because it helps another individual validate the feelings they have within themselves. And I think that that's where we're really looking for a connection. So when we say, oh, you know, I was raped by a man in a hotel, it's like, okay, there's the experience, but what was the feeling attuned to this? Where were you disconnected from yourself? What was the situation? How do I get myself out of this? You know, because the whole picture is really the wonderful lesson that we can share. And it's like, wow, we've just turned like rape into a wonderful lesson for another human being, because I think that's the way we need to talk about it. And really, if we can create communities like this, like, you know, what you're doing with men's groups and whatnot, I think is just brilliant, because you've been affected in this way throughout your childhood and throughout the course of your life. I think, wow, man, like, you know, ones and zeros a bank account have nothing compared to the purpose of one's life.
Absolutely. And of course, as you say, I mean, if you can, when you talk about it, somebody sitting in the audience or sitting in a group or wherever they might be, will go, well, that happened to me, and he's talking about it in that way. So it's, you know, you hope it's time for me to look at it now and do something about it. And there's somebody else, and you know, that's the hope that people will take that and use that to do what we've been talking about, find the truth of it and find a healing and get some ability to understand themselves and work on that.
And
That's the
there
goal.
Yeah, that's the goal. And there are organizations, I mean, when we're looking, like, let's say we've experienced physical or sexual abuse, or, you know, we've experienced prison confinement or confinement, whatever it may be. There are organizations in cities, in towns, that are advocating for individuals to step forward. So if people are looking for a way or a place where they can alchemize their difficult experience into something beautiful and step out and be a voice, like, there are places that are open to have lived experience come on and talk. I'm finding this out in my life. Of course, mental health and addiction were a large part of my life, but I really am creating a community with individuals by having conversations with you and my other podcast guests, that have been through very difficult things, so that we can be a voice together, you know, and we can affect many lives and many different traumatic experiences by being voices and stepping out. Because I think that that's, you know, that's how we're changing the world. That's what we're doing. I love my brothers and sisters. I love every single human experience. Even you know, people say, well, how can you love the politicians and the organizations that are on this planet? Hey, man, like, politicians, if you look at their childhood, you know, growing up into these families with power, they were never seen and never heard, which is why we have large demand for an ability to be seen on these platforms. And they've been led to believe that being born into these powerful families means that the other people below them are less. So can we really judge an individual for what their learned behaviors are in this life? Rather, I look at it as an opportunity to inject love into that system and not give up on anybody.
Yeah, and it's a great viewpoint too about, because people will reject the politician or all of those people or the CEO of a big company, but he's, whatever that, but they've had their, if you trace it back and sit them down and talk to them, they've had their childhood issues as well,
Yeah.
and that's what's driven them to the point they are. So just because they have a lot of money or they have a lot of power or they have whatever it might be, does not mean they have, as we know, a happy life, and their family doesn't have a happy life. So yes, we need to understand all people and understand that everybody needs the sort of love and self-care we're talking about.
Absolutely. I appreciate you, man. I hope you
No
know
worries.
we turned this 30-minute conversation into a podcast episode. Um, I've learned to just hit record in the beginning because sometimes these beautiful conversations just transpire, and I missed out on a couple, and I was like, I'll never do that again. So um, I
It
hope.
is always wise to hit record first and then worry about whether you can use the stuff later.
Yeah, that's it. So I appreciate you so much
No
for
worries.
making this conversation so just filled with wisdom. I mean, I've learned from you, and that's really my greatest thing is when I can bring people on here. I mean, I have these conversations for me, and other people, if they can learn from them, which I'm so grateful they do, it's just a wonderful side effect. I also want
Yeah,
to.
yeah,
I,
yeah.
I
You've given
also
me a lot to think about.
Thank you. I appreciate that. I also want to point out your real experience. Your RX symbol is amazing.
Well, so that's the consulting group I'm trying to set up to help with men. So that's what it's called, Real Experience Consulting. But yeah, I'm not overly creative, but I quite like that. So
Oh, I love it. No, no. What do you mean you're not overly creative? You won the friggin' thing when you were in third grade. Like
yeah. Hey,
you.
listen, when I tell you it was a picture of the Beatles, you'll realize how old I am. But I was very, that's the only time I've won an award for a painting, let me tell you. Yeah, it was, I wish I'd kept it. It was one of those things, as a kid, you don't,
Yeah.
but I wish I'd kept that. Years later, I got to see Paul McCartney playing live, but that's as close as I got to a Beatle. But yeah, it's I mean, I love creativity in people, whether it be painting, whether it be drawing or music. I would love to be able to sing and play an instrument. I have to learn to play an instrument. I just think that music is such a good thing for your soul that I would love to have that sort of talent. But we're given certain gifts and we have to live with those.
Yeah, and if do you mind my asking how old you are?
65.
Yeah, man, listen, I'm going to tell you, as an individual having 65 years experience on this planet, I respect you immensely for have breaking generational trauma and old world ideologies and patterns and behaviors and stepping out of your comfort zone and going against what many of your generation find normal. I appreciate you that. I appreciate you for being an example for that because at 65 to speak the way you do and to write a book about your experiences and to be open and vulnerable about that, we must see that as an award in itself. So I believe you've achieved a very wonderful award in this life, and that should free you up time to learn a musical instrument.
No worries. Thanks. Thanks, Justin. I'll probably pick up the recorder or the banjo or something.
Anything, man.
Yeah.
I'll be there at your first
Okay.
recital. I will definitely be
Okay. First live gig, you get a free ticket.
there. Nice one. Okay, man. I appreciate you.
Yeah. You too. You have a great day.